Okay. Hei, 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 og velkommen til Fagprat hos NetLife for the first time ever in English. So I'll try my very best. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Daniel. I work here at NetLife as a designer and the host of Fagprat. And with me today I have two wonderful guests. I have Zoe Harris.
Hi.
And you are the leading content designer at Oda.
That is correct.
And I have also Andrea Rognan, who is a senior content designer here at NetLife, and also has been a lead designer at Supersteria. You've done a lot of fun stuff. Good.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about testing content, how to do it, and why to do it, and yes, how and why. And if anyone has questions as we go, you just raise your hand like this. And then a microphone will magically appear and you can ask the question. And if you're online, you can type your question in the chat and it will reach me somehow. Good. So I thought we could start with a little bit of background and also like why do we want to talk about testing content? Do you want to
just
start?
go.
Just go.
Okay, well, I'm the reason why we're speaking English today. So yeah, I've been at Oda for 3.5 years. And before that, I've held various content-related jobs in different tech, usually startup companies in Norway. Why we want to talk about content testing? Why wouldn't I want to talk about that? Yeah, it's something I don't think is done enough and is very difficult to do specifically because it's always part of something bigger. And so you're not always testing just content, you're always testing a design with content in it. But my feeling is that we often don't look specifically at what we're saying in a product or in a flow. We're looking more at the sort of theoretical of how people are moving through something and not how the words are helping them do that. So I have a lot of interest in looking at those things together.
And how did you kind of get started in content design? Like, where did you develop this interest?
I actually started out as a project manager. So I was sort of in the tech realms, but it wasn't until a downsizing when I was working at Opera Software and I'd been off on maternity leave and I came back and everything had changed. And they said, oh, I see that you studied writing. Do you want to join our documentation team? And I thought, no. But it was either that or marketing, and that seemed like a dumb move with a small baby. So I did documentation for a while, and it was fine, but it wasn't for me. So from there, I went freelance for a few years and did all kinds of book editing and fiction editing and all of these different things with words. And then landed a consultant gig at Schibsted where they were running up to GDPR coming down and they needed somebody to work on how to get people to opt in privacy settings. And so that was the first time I was hired in specifically as a UX designer with content, and it just sort of built from there.
How about you, Andrea? How did you start working with content?
I started working with plain language first, and starting out there, the question was often, is it possible to test copy at all? Like, how do you do it? Often it was just, we have this old text and we have this new text that we've written. Which one do you like best? And then I moved on to working with design and UX research and figured out that there's tons of fun ways to test copy and test content. And from then on, I've worked a lot with helping people find new methods of doing it and working smarter with testing content. Yeah.
But like, okay, so testing content, how would you differentiate, or would you differentiate testing content from so I'm an interaction designer, right? So I do a lot of user testing. Am I doing something completely different from what we're talking about now, or?
Not completely different, but sometimes glossed over, I think. From my perspective, it's really useful to have a content person involved in the testing, just because they're going to look at the responses from user testing a little bit differently and combine it with what you're learning about the interaction, and then you can put together more of a holistic iteration plan.
And I think with usability testing, we're always super focused on, is the user able to complete a task? So it's very like task orientated. And copy is always the thing that actually lets them do that. It's the reason they can find stuff. It's the reason they can understand what they're supposed to do. So I think testing any design without content or with like pointless content doesn't get you the answers you want. And while usability testing, just listening to the understanding and the words that the user is giving you is super useful. So it's more, I think it's more about actually listening to language people are using.
Do you have any like favorite methods of doing this? Like how would you go about testing content today? Or do you test it?
Today or last week, I'm sure lots of you have heard about what's happening at Oda right now. Yeah, I mean, because I've worked particularly at Oda in a sort of central role, and until recently, all of our content designers were working centrally and in a response-based environment, we were not able to be heavily involved in whatever testing was going on, but we recently decided to move into a semi-embedded model so that we were each supporting selected teams, and that was allowing us to get closer to any testing that was going on in specific teams, and just being in the right conversations at the right time, which was really useful. And so I think had we been able to continue on in that way, we would have been a lot closer to all of that. But we're often consulted as well, just partly on scripts about what we're going to ask users, but also for the perspective of what should we be looking for in the responses, whether it's surveys or qualitative testing or whatever that is.
But I feel like you also mentioned like being a part of the planning of usability testing, but I feel like one of the things a lot of people forget is all the feedback you get from feedback forums or customer service. I mean, it's today we're talking about testing content, but it's still necessary to include all those analytics and responses you get after the content is live.
That's true, and we're lucky in the sense that most of our people are also our customers. Like we all use our own service. So there's no end of people we can just go and chat to in the office about did this or that work, or do you like this or that better, or just people giving us feedback in general. And then we have a fairly direct line to our customer service people as well about what sorts of complaints are coming in, what do people not know how to do, what are they asking questions about that we actually already do but they couldn't find it. So we have this sort of incidental feedback loop as well.
Because one of the things I often see as a consultant is that content people get really isolated. So they keep having to figure out their own testing methods and doing it alone. And using UX designers and customer service and analytics to help you is always the best and like quickest way of getting answers. But to answer your question, I feel like I try not to get a favorite method of testing content because there's so many different ways of doing it. In NetLife, we do a lot of A/B testing. We do a lot of usability testing. But when it comes to content, you can test readability, understanding, tone of voice, findability. There's so many different ways and methods that's kind of answers specifically what you're wondering works within your content. So I try not to get stuck just doing usability testing or just doing A/B testing, but actually finding all those different methods of doing card sorting and tree jack and talking to users about understanding. Yeah.
We actually have a question from Ingeborg on the internet.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned tree jack, but like, do you have any specific tools? I know you just said not to fall in love with the specific method, but do you have any tools that you use that you'd recommend?
Tools, not exactly. We use Ditto both for content designing and to a certain extent localization, which allows you to have variants on different copies. So we could theoretically use that for testing, and we sort of do that in the different languages to see whether this or that language is landing the way we want it to.
Right.
And we might compare that to how one market is responding and another one isn't, and look at doing the same thing in the other one. Or if our users have English set as their language and somehow they responded better to the English, we can look at what the other languages were doing differently, because we tend to transcreate rather than translate.
Transcreate?
Yeah, so meaning not just literally translating the base language, but taking the intention of it and making it right for the market.
Sounds good. Do you have any thoughts?
Tools, well, I do mostly like concept testing or in the discovery phase. I'm not like Zoe working that much in like the continuous product development. So I'm a huge fan of like Sharpies and paper still, and talking to people and keeping it simple. So doing online testing, showing people sketches digitally. But we still use top task analysis to find out what's relevant for people. It's been difficult finding a good tool for that lately, but Skira is developing a new tool for that. And also Optimal Workshop is still one of the best kind of easy ways of testing navigation and categories and what people will click first, what people find most relevant, testing those early sketches and early concepts. It's still Optimal Workshop, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. So we talked a bit about like how you kind of the tools you're using today, kind of the methods you're using today. But do you have any like in an ideal world, how should people be working when they're testing content? Like, how should we do it? When should we do it?
I think this answer for me is always tangled up with how do you work with content design in general. So as early as possible and as close as possible is the answer to both those questions for me. And I think most content designers would tell you that a big part of their job is evangelism of the discipline itself. And until people get that message, we'll keep doing it forever. But like I said, it's been 3.5 years for me, and I feel extremely supported and that Oda really understands the value of content design. But you still have to have pointy elbows and make sure that you're invited to the right meetings and that you're involved in initiatives early enough to have a content perspective on what you're doing and how it's going to roll out. And then that follows along to the testing phases wherever they happen.
Yeah.
But if you're not involved in the conversations, you can't be involved in the testing.
Right. So it just needs to be like natural, I guess, because you have the content person in the room, so of course they're gonna
exactly.
help with
They're
testing.
going to have opinions. We do.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. It's the main point is actually testing the content. So if you're already doing usability testing, actually including content into that evaluation. But still, I feel like you get the most value out of testing your content if you're doing it super, super early. So in the IDs phase, figuring out what's relevant, what's necessary, what kind of content we actually have to make. I feel that's the most important testing and the testing you find the most value out of. And you often get the answers of what people, what kind of words people use and what they find understandable and relatable. You often get those answers for free if you talk to them super early. So I feel like testing low fidelity sketches, just asking them questions and not waiting until that title is perfect or you have the entire article or you have all the microcopy in your product before testing. So early is the key. Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts about like working in a big product organization and you have your service in many countries, many languages? Like how like if everything was rigged, if you had total control over Oda, like how would you kind of rig the kind of deployment and running and testing of new content in the day-to-day?
Well, the way things were supposed to go, where we were looking at expanding into a number of different countries, my plan was to have one specific language content designer for each market so that we would be covering all our translation needs in-house and be making content specifically for each particular market. And with that plan, the more markets we expanded into, the more content designers we would have. And then the more teams we get to cover, because the product doesn't necessarily get any bigger, just the audience does.
Right.
And so in that way, you sort of sneak attack with getting a bigger content design team. I did not factor in us losing markets. So that was, maybe not thought through so well, but I'm an optimist. But yeah, so my point there is that having more of us is key to making sure that you've got the sort of time and bandwidth and mental energy to be involved in testing while you still have to do all the rest of your other work.
Do you have any do you have any tips for like? I'm sure someone here is like the only content designer, or someone listening is like the only content designer in the place. Like, do you have any tips for them? Like, where should they start? How do they get their foot into the door, to the room where they need to be?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're already in the company, somebody understands the value. Something of a mantra for me over the years has been that we have to let people feel the pain. So you should not say yes so often and not try to be everything and do everything. And then it becomes obvious where the care and the work on the content was done. You get some areas of the product that are lower quality than others, and once you can see that contrast, you see what can be brought, and therefore why we need more of them.
Solo content person getting started with testing? Was that the question?
Like kind of where should you start if you haven't done?
If you haven't done it,
Part of the question.
or
maybe if you haven't done it, if there's resistance, like how do you kind of get the ball rolling? I guess.
I feel like my answer to any question like that is always going to be don't ask for permission, just do it. I feel like as a consultant, I probably have a very skewed view of how organizations work because I usually come in like cowboy hat in hand and just do whatever I need to do to deliver whatever I need to deliver. But I usually just put on a smile and do it and say, of course, we're going to do this. We have to. And then, of course, it's just keeping it simple. One of the easiest testing methods I use when I don't have a budget and I don't have the time is just like the micro test that was created by Laura Arlov in Skatteetaten, like probably 20 years ago, which is just like giving someone a headline or the start of a product page, and then asking them, what do you expect to find here? What kind of questions do you have? What do you expect to be able to do here? And then letting people answer. And then using that as a jumping off point to create the content. And I've done that on like Post-its, walking around in a cafeteria at a university, working with students as a target group, and just spending 15 minutes getting what I need to make the copy. So it's basically don't ask for permission and just keep it as simple as you need to make it to actually get it done. Don't think you have to recruit users and spend an hour and have a lab if you don't have the resources to do that. Then you have to find some kind of method that actually answers what you need to get answered. And that can be Post-its. Yeah.
And your internal relationships will do that as well. If you find the people who are already doing the testing, you can join them and bring your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of segue, because as we were having, like, we talked about this, we had a quick chat, and it's like if I'm playing devil's advocate, right? Me as a designer, in most projects, I'm the person who's like, you're going to do the testing, right? So let's say that I have a very fragile ego, and then someone is coming and trying, you guys are coming in and trying to take away my thing. This is my thing, So do you have any tips for like how to get a good samarbete, a good cooperative relationship with the designers or with the team as a content designer?
Yeah, I think it's about extra resources. Like, there's very few people who would say, no, I don't want someone to help write down or take notes during user interviews, or, no, I don't want anyone to think of interview questions or help me write this survey, or, I think adding more resources rather than elbowing you in and trying to take over anything is a more helpful approach.
And I also think any designers who have like a fierce ownership of testing, and especially usability testing, need to like chill out for a bit.
I'm gonna take
because
that note,
it's I feel the most successful projects I've worked on, we've had developers being the test guides, we've had designers doing it, content people doing it, business developers participating. You need the entire team to actually understand what's going on with the users. So, but that being said, I have experienced some service designers. I hope there's not anyone feeling offended, but some service designers feeling like a lot of content designers is kind of stepping on their territory, because we usually work a lot with figuring out what something should be and figuring out concepts and doing a lot of the UX research. So you always have to like figure out what you're good at and who wants to contribute where, and remember that you're a team. Yeah.
Good. I'll chill out. Do you have any questions? Ooh, 2 questions.
Woo!
Wonderful. We'll start. I think you did it exactly at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if you could be a little bit more specific on what you are actually testing. So you talked a little bit about usability and readability and tone of voice also, but what are actually the indicators, and when do you know that you've done a good job? So is it also, how does this affect, for example, conversion, if we're talking about a product? Yeah, would be nice to get a little bit more info on that.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult to like go into super detailed methods descriptions without boring you guys, but I think if you divide it up in like finding the content, understanding the content, and using the content, like finding the content is testing, for instance, what kind of words you use in the navigation. And there's methods to test whether or not people can find the right content based on the one word you're using, if that's descriptive enough. So that's where you have like tree jack and card sorting and those kind of categorizing and putting the right word to it methods. And then when it comes to understanding and mainly also tone of voice, it's I usually do a lot of alternatives. So I have like 2 or 3 different types, different versions of the text, and I get them to comment on their understanding or answer questions after they've read the copy, or describing the tone of voice of the text. You also have like super simple method that's them highlighting words that make the content more understandable or that are difficult words. So there's a lot of different ways of testing like understanding and what they interpret from the text. But it really depends when choosing methods. It really depends where you're at in the process and what you need to figure out. So that's why I always like spend some time figuring out what we actually need to test in the content and if it's valuable to test it. So while creating a concept, you want to test the voice and tone, you want to test them understanding the concept and the structure and a lot of the stuff. But if you're working on like web content, you might just want to test like headlines and how much of the text they're reading. I don't know if that answered your question, but it really depends. Yeah.
Yeah, and then from our perspective, we're moving pretty fast most of the time and testing things more in a live environment through experiments. And sometimes that comes down to what I was saying before about it works in one language and not another. To give a very specific example, we had a section called Especially For You, which was some products that you've bought before but maybe haven't bought recently, mixed in with some things that our data models think you might like based on that. But it was all around the concept of things that other people might not like so much, but we think you will based on your profile. And in English, that sounded like you have special and unique and sophisticated tastes. And in Norwegian, it came out like you're a freak and you're the only one who would like these things. And so we sort of got that feedback live, like, don't judge me for my taste in groceries.
That's super fun.
So, and that was internal feedback. People feeling a little bit threatened by our choice of language. So, I mean, that sort of thing we know when we're doing it right and when we're doing it wrong pretty quickly from the response both to adding things to baskets and whether people are doing a thing that we need them to do based on the explanations that we've given in our copy.
Nice.
You mentioned that you like to use a variety of different methods. Often, especially when you're a consultant, you have a limited time frame.
Yeah.
How do you decide on which methods to use, given that you only have a short period of time to do this?
It's really hard to answer. I think it's pretty like quick decision in reality, but it's always based on mostly like how much time do I have and can we get the users, or is it hard to recruit the users? Then we need to have a method where we actually go out and seek them out. So going and doing guerrilla testing, or doing the post-it exercise I mentioned, or sending out some kind of digital survey where you can send it out to as many people as possible. So I feel like time and how easy it is to recruit users is often like the triggers of choosing the method. But then when it comes to testing the actual content and choosing the method for that, it's still based on whether or not I need to figure out what I should make. So what's relevant for them, what they need, what kind of questions they have, harvesting all of that, and or testing if I actually answered their questions. But if we're making something new, we might do something simple like a 5-second test where you let someone see a page for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and then just ask them, what can you do here? What did you notice? What can you remember reading on that page? So it depends on like what kind of phase I'm in, what kind of method I use. But it's mostly like time. Is it easy to get the users? And what level of the content creation am I at? Am I at figuring out what this should be? Or am I at figuring out what word to use on the button? And where you are in that spectrum, there's methods for every level there. And also methods that are super complicated and high effort, and methods that are super simple. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? If you're on a budget and you have a time constraint, like
We're always on budget and we always have a time constraint.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't
Yeah.
get into the same depths as
Yeah.
you do in the creation phases, at least not for content. We've been sort of on the back foot for a long time, just kind of keeping up with the workload. But in a perfect world, like I completely agree that there are these different methods for different parts of the process.
But I think, again, it's also like if you're on a time frame and as a consultant, not forgetting all the like free insight that is just sitting there, like going out and actually going and talking to Gerda at customer service will often get you a lot of the answers you need without having to spend time recruiting users. And then maybe you can be even more targeted when you're testing, because Gerda gave you some of the answers, and then the analytics gave you some of the answers, and then you're down to like 20% not knowing what the users need. Yeah.
And I think in your case, coming in as a consultant, you're brought in for a very specific reason and part of the process, whereas I'm not working in a vacuum. There's always other people doing other parts of the design work, and so it's always in cooperation with them. And what they already know and what our UX research department has done in the lead up to this initiative. So there's always groundwork to go on, and there's always past history to look at.
Nice. There was a point I just wanted to touch on that we talked about when we were preparing about how it can be harder to work closely together when you have like a very good design system, or when everyone's in Figma. Like there was some.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because you were talking about
the eternal asking for edit access in Figma. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily relate to testing, but it relates to like the collaboration we've touched on many times.
Yeah, and this sort of taking things back to basics.
Yeah.
Because we have quite a robust, well-developed design system, which is great, and it really speeds things up. But it means that people start in Figma often, and they're not going back to pen and paper or sticky notes or whatever. And it means that maybe things are further along by the time my eyes get on them, and I might have said something different if we'd been back feedback with the pens and sticky notes.
And I feel like working with content can become kind of all-consuming sometimes, because you usually want to get in early because you know that the content is always connected with the structure and the flow and the order of the things the user is seeing. So you want to explain things at point A because they're going to do something at point B where they're already going to be confused. So you want to get in early to be able to influence that flow and that structure in some way. And I think some of the, it's a good English word for fallgruver?
Pitfall?
Pitfalls, yes. Some of the
Just learned a
pitfalls
new word.
of, yeah, some of the pitfalls of having super easy access to like high fidelity prototyping, where you have a great design system, you can make a prototype that looks real, it feels real, it's great, but it's gone so fast that no one has actually looked at the words or the flow or the order of things. You're often like back to almost using lorem ipsum, or like not really having the content be a real part of the design. So just content people should just like get in early and rather have a say about like the structure and flow of things early, and then leave like the wording and everything a bit later. And yeah.
Well, it's also a downside too, isn't it, where somebody says, I'll just stick some words in here for now to get the intention across, and then if I come in at the end to write the final copy, I'm kind of poisoned by what's already there, and I can't look at it with fresh eyes anymore, whereas, you know, pen and paper, sticky notes, whiteboards, all of that, you don't have any of that that's gotten in your way, and you can think a bit more fresh.
I think maybe it's also a consequence of COVID and working from home for 2-3 years, that I feel myself that I often start in Miro or Figma or some digital tool where you should actually be sitting down with a whiteboard or pen and paper and collaborating on like, oh, we should have this heading and this flow and this content. Yeah. That's the way you get the best prototype to actually test, is when content is involved early. Yeah.
Now, we talked a lot about kind of testing for comprehension, like having the conversation, showing it to people, but Zoe, do you have any thoughts about how to test at scale? Like you said that, you know, you test live a lot of things. Like how do you kind of gather feedback from the great masses? Like how do you work?
Well, this is going to get a little bit meta, but we have surveys that go out both just when you've finished shopping and also when you've just had your delivery. So we both work on the wording for the survey itself and then use the information from the survey to look at what has happened or what has gone wrong if it's a complaint or whatever. So we've had to recently relook at the survey questions themselves, because we understand that sometimes they get a little too detailed and somebody just wanted to give us a compliment or just say, it didn't go great, but I've got nothing more to say than that. And it goes through into a way too detailed flow. So there's, like I said, there's sort of layers of testing the survey itself as to how effective it is, but also looking at the responses that we're getting. And those come through to customer service. And so, like I said, we have something of a dialogue with them to work out what's going wrong. And we have a Slack channel where they tell us both customers' feedback, positive and negative, and ideas that customers have. And sometimes they have ideas that we've already solved. And so then we think, okay, so there's a communication problem there, that they don't know that this feature exists, or they don't know where to find it, or so we've got to do something better in that way.
Do you do A/B testing, changing only content?
I believe our marketing people do, but not so much in the product content.
Cool. Do you have any thoughts about testing at scale?
No. I usually have the privilege of coming in before something becomes real. So I usually work on the discovery phase and kind of making the concept, building everything from scratch, and then handing it over and saying, "Good luck. I hope we did the right thing. I hope this works." But still, I do a lot of assignments where I come in and I'm tasked to evaluate something. And I love it when people have, again, like customer service and feedback stuff, like just available to everyone and logged and tagged. That's so useful for content, because that's usually where you find those big feelings and huge misunderstandings, and where the kind of logic breaks for the users. So any organization that has that setup, I feel like I can kind of relax and get a feeling of them being robust. Yeah.
I just had a thought, obviously apropos, when they were talking about having the thing set up, because I was at Telenor a bunch of years ago, and they have this, did you find what you were looking for on this page?
Yeah.
And so I came in and I was like, oh, hey, you got this thing. Have you got feedback from it? And they were like, oh, yeah, I think we do. And they had this form, which no one had looked at for, I don't know, 4 years. And it was like 20,000 messages.
Gasps.
And about half of them were about like how they didn't like my mom or something. But it was quite, people get very angry when they didn't find what they liked. So they wrote all these angry messages. Anyways.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
I worked with chatbots for a few years, and people write a lot of stuff in chatbots that they think no one's gonna read.
Wait, but you can read it. Oh, no.
We read them. Yeah. Yeah, that's also weird. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions? Anything you wanna?
No. Any questions from the internet?
No.
No.
I think we're answering all the questions as we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. But then we can kind of move on to the next kind of point I thought we'd talk about, because now we talked a lot about like how to do it, tools, methods, how to get in there. But do you have any thoughts on how to kind of to sell the value of this? Like, okay, so you have the designer on board, you're a good team working together, but you're not given resources or time by leadership. Like, how does one sell the value of testing content?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, it comes along, like I said, with this evangelism that we all have to do anyway. I think to a certain extent you have to let the results speak for themselves. So just take the time that you need to do it however you can, and then use those results to demonstrate the value, in the sense that if you can show what you would have done differently had you had more resources, if you can do, like you're saying, some guerrilla testing, some kind of ad hoc stuff that you just organize yourself, and show what changes that would make, to give evidence.
Yeah, I think if I just, before we started, I just talked to one person who's alone as a UX designer, and I feel like that's also like content people, often alone, having to like defend actually getting to do the job, as well as UX designers. I think just starting, if there's no culture for testing or thinking about the user at all, I think just starting small, being super good at documenting it, and actually showing leaders how people actually react to the content is super powerful. Preferably with like quotes and video and frustration and feelings. But then I've stopped talking about improving the user experience or making the experience more enjoyable, or the fact that it's important, that it's understandable, because that doesn't get get me more money or time to do it when talking to a leader. So I usually just talk about lowering risk, getting quicker to the end result, because we save time by testing. We're not stuck in a loop where we're asking ourselves what to do. We actually get the answers from the users. So it's more efficient, saves us money, lowers risk, and it reduces the chance that you have to do something over again. Like it makes you actually successful on the first try. So I think it's when selling the value of testing content, just like testing designs, it's still about like showing the value for the organization in time or money or risk. That's still what you have to say. Yeah.
I think I feel like content design is kind of in a spot where interaction design was a couple of years ago. And it's
Or
kind
graphic design.
Yeah, graphic design or service design. Like I feel like the same kind of. Why do we have to do the same thing for a new kind of field every 5 years?
Yeah.
Why can't? Didn't we do a good enough job 10 years ago? Like what happened?
I feel like content also has the thing with, well, you're so good at writing that we don't need to test this.
Yeah, that's why we hired you,
because this is
yeah.
your job, so you should be good enough that we don't really need to test it. Or you meet the kind of opinions about content the way graphic designers meet opinions about visual design, where people say, I don't like orange. People can say, well, I have a really good pen, so I know how this text should be. But we're still writing for users. We're not writing for ourselves or for other people in the organization. So being kind of ruthless about this being like text and content with a function that has to work for a user outside of your organization has to like be hammered in everywhere you go. It doesn't help if you can do some magic with words, or if you have a good pen, or if you studied literature in high school. You still have to test the content.
Yeah, we can always write good content, but if the overall kind of concept or narrative is not right, it's just going to be nice words in a meaningless journey, or just in a broken journey. And you won't know that unless you test early.
I think it's a good point about like, okay, so I've been working with design for nearly 10 years now, right? So I feel like I've got a kind of good grasp on it. But one of my core insights about myself is that everything I make is basically shit. until I test it, you know?
Yeah.
Because I've never had a first draft become the thing. Never ever. Like I make the first sketch and it just sent to print. Let's go. Never happened, right? Why? Because it needs to be tested and then it improves. And I think it's the same for everything, I guess.
And I think that's what distinguishes content design, writing for users, from a lot of other writing projects, is the fact that you're actually, you know that your first draft is going to be shit. It's going to be useless. It's going to be, you don't know what you're doing. And then you have to work on like a process of testing it and working out what actually works. And being humble about the fact that you're not going to write a good text like on the first draft. And also like not starting with correcting small words and details in your copy, actually starting with structure, then working down to like the components, and then working down to like the details as a process is what kind of distinguishes it from working with like fiction or poetry.
Well, I think even fiction, there's a quote from this Simpsons writer called John Swartzwelder. He wrote a lot of Simpsons back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he kept talking about how writing is hard, but rewriting is easy.
Yeah.
So he would just kind of puke out his first draft.
Yeah.
on like a bad night, and then he would wake up the next morning and be like, finally my job is easy because now I just have to rewrite this horrible shit. He would write like super basic dialogue, like I am hungry, okay, let's go, and then he would kind of have that as a starting point. But then at least he had something to bounce off himself.
It's always easier to edit something and to edit something based on feedback, whether that's from a usability test or a coworker, than it is to sit alone and like work on that text forever and ever and ever and getting more and more frustrated. And I feel like in Netlife, we've always had the mantra, skriv et drittutkast. And I still have to use that when I go out and work with people that are not used to writing for users and user experience, because you need to like just come as quickly as possible to the point of getting to test something and getting feedback and then rewriting, because that's where you do the magic. Yeah.
Yeah, and in so many other kinds of writing, it's about what do I want to say. And this is not about what I want to say. It's what do they need to know and what do they want to know. And what do they want to know without reading? Because we know that users don't read, they absorb. So how can you write in a way that's absorbable? And so that by the time they get to the end of a journey, they know some things without having stopped and read every bit.
That's cool. So that's why we test.
Exactly.
Good.
Yep.
We're nearing an hour. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, question in the front.
How do you incorporate I'm not sure if it's the English translate, but universal utforming, universal design in your testing? Or at which point do you incorporate that?
Yeah, tough question.
The question was, how do you incorporate universal utforming in testing content? What is the English word for accessibility?
Accessibility.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, at Schibsted, we had a rule that it should be understandable by a 12-year-old or older. And that was to do with privacy choices and so on. And so it's a lot of legalese, and it's based on privacy policies, which, of course, we know nobody wants to read and no one reads. So the sort of summary of these things had to be clear enough that a 12-year-old could make the decisions about their own privacy as easily as an adult could. So it's an unconscious rule of thumb that I think I stick to even now, that it, anyone who's sort of over primary school age should be able to follow the concept of what you're doing.
Yeah. I think the content equivalent of accessibility, or what's closely related, is plain language, klarspråk. And the good thing about plain language is that it's well researched, and it's a lot of the time standardized. So there's a lot of good standards for what comprehensive, understandable headline is, or how long your words can be before they are harder to understand, and what kind of reading level your text is at. So I feel like plain language is not necessarily always a huge part of my testing. I always try to look for the words people are using themselves, like making it more closely related to their language. But when it comes to plain language, I usually just follow the standards as like a hygiene part of it. And when it comes to plain language, you have like the readability guidelines, you have the ISO standard for plain language, you have a lot of stuff from Språkrådet that's like super concise, well-researched, evidence-based ways of formatting your content. So it's more like following VKG in a good way than testing your way to understandable copy necessarily. Yeah.
We've also undergone accessibility auditing, not so much on the content itself, but in the accessibility tags and screen reader text for an app or whatever. So having that audit let us know whether we were doing it right and how it was for somebody using a screen reader to navigate their way through our product as well.
And actually observing someone using a screen reader on your content is insane. It's really useful. You actually realize, I feel like a mantra for many years has been people don't read on the web. And I feel like that's kind of been debunked. People still read on the web, but people with screen readers read so fast and so they move on so quickly that actually experiencing that and knowing that you might have like 2 words before they've actually moved on is super useful. So front-loading all your headlines, front-loading all your links, front-loading all your alt texts, all of that is super important. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Any other questions before we wrap up? Oh, last question in the back.
Thank you. Hi. When you're A/B testing content, how do you determine for how long should you test a particular piece of content, like 30 days, 90 days, or that sort of thing?
I don't really have an answer for that one because we don't work exactly that way. Our marketing people could probably give you a better answer to that than I could.
I think there's actually, I mean, I've been at NAV, we did a lot of this kind of things, and I mean, there are calculators where you can kind of determine based on how much traffic you get, because it really does depend on how many people are exposed to the test before it becomes
significant.
Yeah, statistically significant. There's always a threshold you have to reach. So, if you have like when I was working with Norwegian, it would take 4 hours and you had an answer, which was such an enormous luxury. But again, it was just used to sell more luggage, so I don't know. But but if you're working now, for example, then we would leave it for like a couple of days, and then suddenly there would be an answer. But yeah, it depends on the traffic, I would say.
Yeah, traffic and users. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, on that note,
Yeah.
do you have any parting words, any last wisdom you want to impart on our audience before we let them go into the rain or sun? I'm not sure.
Not that I can think of now that you put me on the spot for it.
No pressure.
I think just keep it simple. Find the easiest method that gets you the answer you need, and stop asking for permission. Just do it. If you're not part of a team that's doing usability testing, do it yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, or find one who is.
Yeah.
Because even if it's not something that you yourself are going to work on, you can get a lot of good tips and ideas from other teams that are already doing things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. 1 minute before time. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming today. Tusen takk til dere som kom hit. Dette var siste Fagprat før ferien. Så det er bare å følge med i alle Netlifes-kanaler og være tilbake her i august en tid, tipper jeg. Så har vi en podcast, det heter Nerding med Netlife, og der kommer det også en episode om cirka dette her om noen uker. Takk for at dere kom. God sommer.